Welcome to Criminalist Behavior Podcast, the podcast that takes you deep into the heart of Louisiana's history and current most chilling true crime stories. I'll be guiding you through the darkness of these crimes and all of those involved. Each week, we dig deep on those forgotten crimes or those crimes currently happening with the underlying legends that continue to haunt us. So lean in, listen, and get ready, because true crime is anything but ordinary. Stay with me as we unravel what happened in these mysteries. So, today we're on Patreon episode number 2. And if this is your first time listening, hi, my name is Sarah Soulier, and I'm your host for Criminalist Behavior Podcast. Today we're covering the case of a fatal romance, how Betty Lou became America's notorious Black Widow. So, trigger warning. This episode may contain content of a graphic nature, including descriptions of physical and sexual violence against adults, children, and animals. Listener discretion is advised. Also, I want to thank you so much for being a Patreon, whether you're our Couillon, Lagniappers, or infamous go-getters. Greatly appreciate you. And we're going to get started. So, Betty Lou Beats. She was born March 12, 1937, and she was a convicted murderer who was executed in the state of Texas. She was found guilty of the murder of her 5th husband, y'all. 5. Numero 5. 5 husbands. And she was convicted on her 5th husband named Jimmy Don Beats, which occurred on August 6th of 1983. So, we're going to get into the early life of Miss Betty Lou, right? Betty Lou, who was born Betty Lou Dunlop, hopefully I said that correctly, doesn't really matter. She doesn't deserve anything. But anyways, she was born on March 12, 1937 in Roxborough, North Carolina. Now, she was born to Margaret Louise Smithwick and James Garland Dunlevant. And she also, at an early age, she started experiencing hearing loss as a result of the measles during her childhood. And it was alleged that she was sexually abused by her father. Now, record states at the age of 3, which would be 1940, is when she got measles and she lost her hearing. When she was age 5, they moved to Danville, Virginia. And according to all accounts, she was raped by her father, right? And during her early years, the family relocated to Virginia, where her father worked as a machinist at the Langley Research Center. At the age of 10, this is when Betty Lou Beats' sister Jackie was born. So, at the age of 12, her mother was institutionalized, which, y'all, that's a whole lot of moving strings, right? A lot is happening to Betty Lou. Her sister was born at age 10, and 2 years after her sister was born, her mother was institutionalized, which left her in the responsibility of her caring for her younger sister and her brother. Subsequently, Betty Lou was also responsible for managing the household and caring for all her other siblings. She later stated that her father and several acquaintances of his would sexually assault her on a regular basis, beginning when she was merely 5 years old. So, at 14, which would be 1951, Betty Lou's mom had a psychotic break. Now we're going to get to Betty Lou's first marriage. Her first marriage, she got engaged in disruptive behavior and was actually arrested for public indecency. At the age of 15, she was trying to be more in pursuit of a more stable life, and she actually accepted a marriage proposal from Robert Franklin Branson. Y'all, age 15, okay? Age 15, she married Robert Franklin Branson after she finished the 9th grade. At age 16, she had her first child. Her first child was named Faye. Now, Betty Lou and Robert's marriage endured 14 years, and this was marked by many separations and allegations of violence, ultimately culminating in a divorce in 1969. So, Robert Granson emerged from the relationship unscathed, and that wouldn't be the case for all the marriages to follow. So, supporters of Betty Lou claimed that nearly all of her marriages were marred by instances of sexual abuse and domestic violence, issues that she was brought to light after her conviction, right? Prior to her murder arrest, Betty Lou had a criminal record that included charges of public lewdness and an incident in which she shot her former husband, Bill Lane. Okay? So, Bill Lane, right? In 1970, she entered marriage with Billy York Lane. Their tumultuous relationship reached a peak when Lane fractured Betty Lou's nose, and this prompted her to retaliate by shooting him twice in the back of the head. The police chose not to press charges as they deemed that Betty Lou's actions were in self-defense. However, y'all, crazy as it seems, guess what? Billy York Lane survived those injuries he sustained, being shot twice. But the marriage ultimately ended. So, at age 16, remember how Betty Lou had her first child? She also had that 6-month separation. She attempted suicide. She reconciled with her husband. She had her second child, Connie, when she was 17. And that's whenever they moved to Mesquite, Texas. She had third child, Shirley, at the age of 22. Fourth child, Phyllis, at the age of 25. And fifth child, Robert Franklin Branson II. Her sixth child was Bobby, and he was born when Betty Lou was 29. So, y'all. Throughout her life, she was married 6 times, including 2 marriages to the same individual, which would be Bill York Lane. In 1970, that's whenever she shot Lane twice in the back, but she was acquitted after he acknowledged that he had first threatened her life. So he admitted that was due to self-defense. Okay? So the couple remarried, but they divorced again within a month. So Betty Lou began a relationship with Ronnie Beckhold, and they culminated in marriage in 1978. The subsequent year, Betty Lou struck Beckhold with her vehicle. So Betty Lou hit her husband, now Ronnie Beckhold, with her car, resulting in a collision. He survived the incident and promptly sought the services of a divorce attorney, which, hell yeah. So Ronnie, also known as Cowboy, was 68. He was from Alexander, and he passed away on October 29, 2012. It wasn't because Betty Lou hit him with a car, because he actually remarried. And he was known to be a cherished husband, father, brother, grandfather, and friend. He was known for his strong work ethic, and he took great pleasure in hands-on activities. He often described himself as a jack of all trades and a master of none, which, oh my God, y'all, my dad says that all the time. There was virtually nothing he could not accomplish. Ronnie had a passion for camping and enjoyed spending quality time with family and friends. It was actually rare to see him without his boots and a cowboy hat. He was born on March 4th, 1944 to Columbus Winter Truckle and Bertha Mildred Truckle in Pine Bluff. And in a memorial that was written for him, it said the following: "We will deeply miss this remarkable individual, his smile, his laughter, his humor, and love, importantly. The way he expressed his love for family by saying loves." And following her separation, Betty Lou entered her 4th marriage with Doyle Wayne Baker. Now, I need to tell you, before she got into this other marriage, she actually had to, or she did, however, she got a restraining order against Billy Wayne when she was 33 in 1970, and divorced him after, they got into it. And she was tried for attempted murder, but there was that, signed affidavit that Billy had, and they actually remarried, but their marriage only lasted for 1 month. So whenever Betty Lou married Ronald, whenever she was 41, they tried, getting together. They were living in Dallas County, Texas, and she just tried to run Ronnie over with her body. She actually, at age 42, started dancing with her top off. So she was a topless dancer. And she was charged with public lewdness while working at the topless bar and spent 30 days in jail in 1979. She divorced Ronnie at age 42, and this is whenever she married Doyle Wayne Baker, and they actually separated 7 weeks later. Betty Lou was in a serious car accident when she was 42 years old in January of 1980, and she suffered major head injuries. And that same year, in July 22nd, 1980, actually, Betty and Doyle got a divorce. So, that is the nutshell of that, right? So, whenever the union lasted, right? I'm getting all caught up. The union lasted, so Doyle Wayne Baker and Betty Lou, Betty Lou's fourth marriage, it only lasted 7 weeks before they officially parted ways. However, Betty Lou ultimately murdered Baker and concealed his body in her backyard, y'all. So, 7 weeks into marriage, she kills Baker and conceals him in her backyard. Now, Baker's remains went undiscovered for 3 years until investigators unearthed both his body and that of Betty Lou's fifth husband, Jimmy Don Beats. Both men had been killed with a .38 caliber pistol. In 1978, Betty Lou attempted to run over her third husband, Ronnie, with her vehicle. Both men survived, but they provided testimony during her murder trial. Now, Jimmy Don and Betty Lou were remarried in 1982. And in August of 1983, Betty Lou reported that he had gone fishing and he just never returned. A few days later, Jimmy Don's fishing boat was found and it was washed upon the shore with his heart medication scattered inside. So for a time, the police thought that it appeared to be consistent with the theory that Jimmy Don had experienced a cardiac event, fallen overboard, and subsequently drowned, right? Wrong. They could be more wrong. So, what happened? On August 6, 1983, Betty Lou Beats reported her fifth husband, Jimmy Don Beats, as missing from their residence near Cedar Creek Lane in Henderson County, Texas. Her son, Robert Branson, later testified that Betty Lou had expressed her intention to kill her husband and actually instructed him, her own son, to leave the property. Upon returning 2 hours later, this is when her son, Robert, discovered Jimmy Don Beats dead. He sustained 2 gunshot wounds, and Robert said that he assisted his mother, Betty Lou, in burying the body in the front yard, after which Betty Lou Beats contacted the authorities. An analysis of the circumstances surrounding Beats' conviction can be really located in the ruling of the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, Beats versus the state. And Beats' fifth husband, Jimmy Don, went missing on August 6th of 1983 with his fishing boat that was later discovered, floating on the side of Lake Athens, Texas, indicating a possible drowning because his heart medication was spread all over the boat, right? Over a year later, a trailer home that belonged to Jimmy Don prior to his death was caught on fire. When the insurance company denied Betty Lou Beats' claim for the damages, she actually consulted E. Ray Andrews, an attorney who had been representing her since 1981 or 1982, And during their meetings, they also agreed that Andrews would investigate any insurance or pension benefits that Betty Lou Beats might be eligible to receive. Now, according to her son, Robert Branson, the following day, Betty Lou placed some of Jimmy Don's heart medication in his fishing boat. Subsequently, they abandoned the boat in the lake, but it was recovered on August 12, 1983, when it washed up near the Redwood Beach Marina. Now, the police believed he had fallen overboard and drowned, and they spent 3 weeks searching the lake for Jimmy Don's remains. Betty Lou and Andrews entered into a contingent fee arrangement, wherein Andrews would pursue the collection of both Beats' fire insurance claim and any death benefits that she may have been entitled to regarding her husband Jimmy Don's disappearance. Upon investigation, Andrews, that lawyer she hired, identified the existence of certain benefits and communicated this information to Betty Lou. To enhance the collection process, he actually enlisted the help of 2 other attorneys with greater expertise in that area. He subsequently organized a meeting at his office that included Betty Lou and Randall Roberts, one of the attorneys he had hired to help with the case. Now, Roberts consented to collaborate with his firm on the case, and eventually the responsibility for Betty Lou's claims was transferred to Roberts' brother, attorney Bruce Roberts. So through their efforts, the City of Dallas Fire Department, which was Jimmy Don's former employer, agreed to provide the benefits to Betty Lou Beats. However, prior to Betty Lou receiving her first payment from the fire department, she was actually arrested on June 8, 1985, and charged with capital murder of Jimmy Don. The charges alleged that Betty Lou shot and killed her husband with the assistance of her son, Robbie Branson, and buried him beneath a planter in her front yard. It was also alleged that Betty Lou disposed of her 4th husband, Doyle Wayne Baker, in a similar manner, with Baker's remains discovered buried in the backyard beneath a patio where a storage shed had been built. Additionally, Betty Lou had previously shot her former husband, Billy Wayne, who actually survived that incident, if you recall. So, she burned down Jimmy Don Beats' lake house when she was 47 years old. That happened in 1984. She filed for Jimmy Don Beats' death certificate in February 1985 and got arrested in June of 1985 prior to receiving the first payment from the fire department. So she got arrested, and now we're going to trial, right? So what happened was Andrew consented to broaden his legal representation to Betty Lou to include the capital murder charge. Now, this case attracted a hell of a lot of media attention, right? Both local and national levels. So on October 8th, of 1985, shortly after commencement of Betty Lou's trial, she executed a contract that assigned all literary and media rights related to her case to Andrew's son, E. Ray Andrews, Jr. The trial judge remained unaware of this media rights agreement during the trial. However, he became informed of it 3 months later during a hearing concerning Betty Lou's request for counsel for her appeal. And when the prosecutor inquired whether Betty Lou had transferred her book rights to Andrew's son, the judge did not question Betty Lou regarding her willingness to forego her Sixth Amendment right to conflict-free legal representation. So, Beats was actually found guilty, and a grand jury indicted her for the murder of Jimmy Don Beats on July 11, 1985. So 1985 is when Betty goes to trial and she's found guilty. She was sentenced on October 14th, which is my daughter's birthday. So she was sentenced October 14, 1985, at 48 years old to the death penalty, y'all. And on September 21st, 1988, she kept on filing appeals, and the conviction was reinstated, right? So, Betty's mom actually died in 1993 when she was 56 years old, and her son died too. So, Betty lost her mom and her son Bobby when she was 56. And Betty Lou contended that she is entitled to relief on the grounds that the trial judge failed to investigate the nature and extent of Andrew's conflict of interest. So, she was found guilty of murder for remuneration and expectation of the remuneration based on the premises that she killed her husband to secure his insurance and pension benefits. One of Andrew's defense strategies during the trial involved challenging the remuneration aspect of that crime. So the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals determined that a person commits a murder for remuneration. And when that person kills a victim to obtain a benefit or financial settlement payable upon the victim's death, such as insurance proceeds and retirement benefits, as in this current case, this is legal binding. So the state was obligated to demonstrate that Betty Lou possessed a specific intent to gain remuneration in the form of insurance or pension benefits following the death of her husband, Jimmy Don. I'm sorry, not Jimmy John. We're not eating. But Betty Lou contended that she is entitled to relief on the grounds that the trial judge failed to investigate the nature and extent of Andrew's conflict of interest. She referenced the case of Holloway versus Arkansas to support her assertion that when a conflict of interest is brought home to the court but the judge fails to conduct an inquiry, a reversal should be warranted. However, the notion of bringing a conflict to the court's attention does not, as Betty Lou implies, compel a trial judge to initiate an inquiry whenever a potential conflict of interest is actually identified. So the Supreme Court did not intend to impose a requirement for trial courts to launch an inquiry each time a potential conflict of interest was recognized. In fact, the court actually clarified in Collier that the defense counsel is obligated to inform the state court promptly when a conflict of interest in a multiple representation case arises during the trial. And that statement directly preceded the excerpt quoted by Betty Lou Beats. So Betty Lou contended that she is entitled to relief on the grounds that a trial judge, right? So the ethical standards established by the Texas State Bar mandate that an attorney must withdraw from representing upon discovering that he or a colleague with whom he is affiliated with ought to serve as a trial witness. So while we do not address whether Andrew's failure to withdraw constituted a breach of a disciplinary rule, it is important to note that a violation of the state's ethical standard does not automatically imply a breach of the Sixth Amendment. A thorough examination of the record led us to conclude that, contrary to the district court's findings, Andrews did not represent Betty Lou Beats while facing a conflict of interest. So Betty Lou contended that Andrews would have been the sole witness capable of providing favorable testimony regarding her state of mind related to the remuneration aspect of the capital murder charge. But she consistently claimed that based on his affidavit submitted during the federal habeas proceedings, it was Andrews who initially proposed that she might be eligible for benefits stemming from her husband's disappearance. Though furthermore, Betty Lou maintained that Andrews' testimony would demonstrate that during their meeting to discuss an insurance claim for the trailer home that, was allegedly caught on fire by accident, and that's air quotations, she was unaware of any potential benefits she may have been entitled to be receiving. So Betty Lou exaggerates both the details of her situation and the legal implications, and Andrews was unable to provide testimony regarding Betty Lou's mental state at the time of the murder, nor could he comment on her knowledge when she engaged his services. So his testimony was limited to his perception that Betty Lou appeared genuinely unaware of any potential benefits she might qualify for, and in fact, during the federal evidentiary hearing, he stated that his interaction with Betty Lou led him to conclude that she was uninformed about the existence of widow benefits. Additionally, both Bruce and Randall Roberts could have provided testimony regarding Betty Lou's evident lack of knowledge, and Bruce Roberts, yes, did indeed testify. He recounted that he first met Betty Lou when Andrews referred her to him for assistance in claiming fire insurance for the trailer home that was caught on fire. Now, Roberts noted that Betty Lou's main focus was on securing the fire insurance benefits and that she did not exert any pressure on him to pursue other insurance or pension benefits. He understood his role to be determine what insurance was available, if any, and he indicated that Betty Lou was unaware of any benefits she could claim. Although, he also mentioned that she brought what appeared to be part of a policy during her visit. So, Y'all, this trucker said that she didn't really know, but yet then he not recants, but then in another statement he says, but she brought a piece of the policy with him whenever they met. So which is it? Did she not know? But she had a policy? Like, what the fuck are you talking about? So, Betty Lou contended that Bruce Roberts' testimony lacked the necessary impact and authority to support the assertion that she was unaware of potential death benefits until nearly 2 years after Jimmy Don's death. Now, this is primarily because Roberts did not engage with Betty Lou until after she had already consulted with 2 other attorneys, Andrews and Rendell. And that was regarding that fire insurance claim and death benefits. Furthermore, Betty Lou argued that neither Bruce nor Rendell could accurately claim that they were the ones to suggest that she might be entitled to benefits related to her husband's disappearance. So, even if one were to accept Betty Lou's factual assertions, she has not successfully established a constitutional predicate necessary for her claim of ineffective assistance to counsel due to a conflicting interest. So, what that states is Betty Lou must demonstrate a violation of the Sixth Amendment in her claim, which would be actively representing conflicting interests, but she couldn't do that. That requirement arose and from the need to ensure that the potential conflicts of interest are not misrepresented as violations of the Sixth Amendment. So, obviously, it was deemed that she couldn't provide that wasn't the case. So, guess what? She lost that argument, baby. So, the potential conflict did not negatively impact Andrew's performance. The performance is defined as any decision made by the defense counsel that can be and reasonably anticipated to influence the final defense, regarding of whether that decision occurs before, during, or after the trial. So, to assess whether Andrew's choice was to withdraw or not withdraw and actually provide testimony negatively that would impact his defense on behalf of Betty Lou, we actually have to evaluate both the credibility of Andrew's exculpatory testimony and the additional evidence regarding Betty Lou's mercenary motives, right? So we have to note that the standard for establishing an adverse effect is less stringent than that required for demonstrating the outcome determination, right? So there was an affidavit submitted during the habeas corpus proceedings where Andrews indicated that Betty Lou was unaware of her entitlement to any benefits. She lacked the knowledge regarding the existence of such benefits or whether or not her husband actually had any type of insurance, and if he possessed a pension or whether she was designated as a beneficiary in any of it. Furthermore, she was uncertain about who, if anyone, might have been her husband's insurer or the amount of coverage she may have had on him. So, according to that affidavit, he noted that he was the one who brought up the possibility of her entitlement benefits, and Bruce Roberts was capable of providing nearly all of this in his testimony. So the sole aspect of Andrews' proposed testimony that Bruce Roberts could not corroborate what Andrews claimed that he suggested Betty Lou was just pursuing her missing husband's insurance and pension benefits. Betty Lou overestimated the significance of that assertion by Andrews, given that Andrews had no knowledge of Betty Lou's actions from the time of the murder until almost 2 years later when they met. He was unable to testify regarding her awareness of any potential benefits. So he couldn't say, like, how she came across knowing about the benefits, right? Until he was contacted 2 years after Jimmy Donnan was missing or dead, whatever. So the case draws significant judicial scrutiny, particularly due to Betty Lou's strong claim that Andrew's principal defense strategy was to attack the remuneration element of the state's case. But that assertion was very inaccurate. The evidence presented indicated that Betty Lou's main defense approach was to establish that her son, rather than herself, was responsible for the death of her husband, Jimmy Don. So Betty Lou was placing all the blame of the death of her husband, Jimmy, on her son, y'all. What kind of mother blames her son for murdering someone? So, furthermore, additional testimony presented during the trial regarding Betty Lou's specific intent implied that even if Andrews had contemplated his role as a potential witness and opted not to withdraw, his absence did not negatively impact her defense. Denny Burris testified contradicting Betty Lou and she inquired about her eligibility for Jimmy Don's insurance and pension benefits merely 3 or 4 days following his disappearance. So the ink on the missing report was not even dry whenever she was filing for this claim of insurance, right? And as a chaplain, Burris was an impartial and credible witness. His testimony pertained to events occurring shortly after the murder indicated that Betty Lou was already aware of Jimmy Don's insurance and pension benefits. Additionally, his communication to Betty Lou regarding her ineligibility for any payments for 7 years offers a plausible rationale for her delay of nearly 2 years before seeking any benefits. So, in fact, Burris' testimony appears to make the statements of either Andrews or Roberts more damaging than beneficial. So, the examination of the record in that matter led them to conclude that despite the diligent efforts of the federal district court, Andrews' failure to testify did not and could not have detrimentally influenced Betty Lou's defense. Betty Lou has not succeeded in demonstrating that Andrews' defense should be examined for potential conflict of interest, and alternatively, when assessing Andrews' conduct during the trial, through the less stringent Strickland standard, Betty Lou was required to show that Andrews' significantly inadequate performance adversely affected her defense. But they granted considerable deference to the performance of trial counsel, maintaining a strong presumption that their actions fall within a broad spectrum of reasonable professional assistance. So, Andrews' representation of Betty Lou did not exhibit deficiencies, nor did it harm her case. So, there was an agreement that was upon E. Ray Andrews Jr., the complete literary and motion picture rights to Betty Lou's narrative fulfilled the financial arrangement between Betty Lou and Andrews. So the district court determined that Andrews' efforts to obtain media rights resulted in a genuine conflict of interest. So the court's legal scholars and members of the bar have consistently criticized such fee arrangements. So what this means is nearly every court that has examined a conflict of interest stemming from a media rights agreement made in favor of trial counsel has firmly rejected that practice. The Texas Code of Professional Responsibility, which governed Andrews' actions during the trial, stipulated that before the conclusion of all matters related to his employment, a lawyer shall not enter into any agreement or understanding with a client that allows him to acquire any interest and publication rights concerning the subject matter of his employment or proposed employment. The Supreme Court of Texas Code of Professional Responsibility, in particular, the context of a capital murder case, which Betty Lou was on, is deeply troubling to consider that the counsel might seek to profit from the tragedy and suffering experienced by his client, her family, and most distressingly, the victim and his relatives. So despite Andrews' evident violation of his ethical responsibilities, the court's role is not to impose sanctions on counsel, but to assess whether Andrews' ethical misconduct infringed upon Betty Lou's Sixth Amendment rights. And it is the state's responsibility to take action against an attorney if they have been proven to have unethical conduct. So the State Bar of Texas actually did not take disciplinary action against Andrews, and they won't yield to Betty Lou's request to penalize her attorney for providing relief to his client. The media rights contract that was presented in a significant potential conflict of interest, Betty Lou did not demonstrate how that potential evolved into a tangible conflict. And while the media rights contract was likely unethical, the circumstances presented do not indicate that it alone resulted in an actual conflict or negatively impact Andrew's performance. Betty Lou contended that Andrew was ineffective during the whole sentencing phase of her trial due to his failure to thoroughly investigate her medical, mental, and psychological background. She claimed that such an investigation would have uncovered crucial mitigating evidence, potentially leading to a sentence less severe than the death sentence that was imposed on her. Betty Lou provided the district court with evidence of her upbringing in extreme poverty, her debilitating hearing loss whenever she was 5 years old from the measles, learning disabilities, childhood head injuries, and her struggle with battered woman syndrome. Because if you recall, apparently every marriage that Betty Lou entered apparently resulted in domestic violence. She was apparently sexually assaulted by her father and all her father's friends and acquaintances. But the district court did not determine whether Andrew's lack of investigation or failure to present mitigating evidence during the penalty phase constituted a deficiency under the first prong of the Strickland test, and as it concluded that no prejudice stemmed from Andrews' inaction. So both the performance and prejudice components of the claim that Betty Lou was stating regarding the ineffective assistance of counsel involved mixed questions of law and fact, which we review de novo. So, in 1985, the Henderson County Sheriff received information that provided sufficient evidence to apprehend Betty Lou for the murder that occurred on August 6th. Following the issuance of a search warrant, investigators discovered the remains of Jimmy Don in a built-in wishing well at Beats' residence. Yeah. She put him down a wishing well and filled it with concrete. What? What? Both the performance and prejudice components of the claim. What? Additionally, the remains of her fourth husband, Doyle Wayne Baker, or Barker, I see both. I don't know which one it is. We'll go with Baker. Were found buried in the garage. Both individuals were shot with that .38 caliber pistol, and Betty Lou was never prosecuted for Baker's murder and was ultimately sentenced to death by lethal injection. So, the trial concerning the murder for financial gain and promise of financial gain of Jimmy Don Beats commenced on July 11, 1985 in the 173rd District Court of Henderson County. Betty Lou entered a plea of not guilty, asserting that the murders were committed by two of her children. On October 11, 1985, she was found guilty. Notably, evidence of abuse was not presented during the trial, and in separate penalty phases held 3 days later, she was sentenced to death. Betty Lou was assigned to TDCJ, also known as Texas Department of Criminal Justice, and she was death row inmate number 810. And this came down from a ruling from the Texas Department of Corrections on October 14, 1985, subsequently being incarcerated in the Mountain View Unit, now known as the Patrick O'Daniel Unit. So in the courtroom, Betty Lou asserted that her son and daughter were actually the ones responsible for the murders, not her. Both of her children provided testimony against her, along with her two surviving spouses. So, the one that she shot twice in the back, right? The one that she tried running over with the car? Yeah. The jury ultimately convicted her and decided that death sentence. Attorneys and advocates against domestic violence consistently highlighted her prolonged mental suffering and severe abuse in efforts to have her sentence reduced to just life in prison, not death, right? Governor George W. Bush demonstrated a lack of sympathy for Betty Lou, even taking a break from his 2000 presidential campaign to return to Texas specifically to witness Betty Lou Beats' execution in the state execution chamber, y'all. And an automatic appeal to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals initially resulted in the overturning of the conviction, which the court stated that insurance and pension benefits did not equate to remuneration. However, following a request for a rehearing by the state on September 21st, 1988, that's when the court reversed its decision, affirmed that the conviction and sentence should remain in effect. This was followed by a decade of appeals that we just went over, and the Supreme Court of the United States denied a writ of certiorari on June 26, 1989. And an execution date was scheduled for November 8th, 1989, and on November 1st, she was granted a stay by trial court after submitting a state habeas petition. However, the Court of Criminal Appeals denied that request on June 27, 1990, resulting in that new execution date of December 6th. So, yeah. Y'all keep that in mind, right? December 6th of 1989 was that execution date. 1990, I'm sorry. In legal terminology, certiorari, in case you didn't know, referred to a judicial procedure utilized to obtain a review of a decision made by a lower court or a government body. So that term actually originated from a prerogative writ in England, which is issued by a higher court to request a transfer of lower court's record for examination. That Latin phrase, translated to mean to be made more certain, reflected the traditional opening of such writs. So, yeah. A federal petition for a writ of habeas corpus was submitted 3 days prior to her planned execution, leading the federal district court to issue a state of execution on December 4th. So habeas corpus was derived from medieval Latin, meaning you. So it means you should have the body. So it serves as an equitable remedy, allowing individuals to report unlawful detention or imprisonment to a court. So that legal mechanism requests that the court compel the custodian, typically a prison official, to represent the accused in court to assess the legality of their confinement. So William Blackstone actually characterized the writ of habeas corpus in the 18th century as great and efficacious writ in all manner of illegal confinement. So that writ actually functions as a summons with the authority of a court order directed at the custodian, mandating that the appearance of the prisoner be before the court and require the custodian to provide evidence of their legal authority to detain that individual. And so basically, they got to prove that they had evidence that she should have been a prisoner, right? So any prisoner or individual acting on their behalf is entitled to the petition of the court or a judge for a writ of habeas corpus. A common reason for a petition would be to seek this writ is the possibility that the person who was accused is being held and it's not illegally holding. So many jurisdictions influenced by the continental European law offered similar remedies for unlawful detention, and during the initial months of 1991, evidentiary hearings took place, culminating in a court ruling on May 9th that provided relief for one of Betty Lou's claims, while they rejected all the other ones. So the United States Court of Appeals affirmed that their decision on March 18th, 1993, and that actually reversed that one claim that had previously been granted relief. So that case was referred to the federal district court, which then denied her habeas corpus relief on September 2nd, 1998. And following that denial of her appeals throughout 1999, an execution date was established for February 24th, 2000. Andrews' representation was adequate. During the sentencing phase of the trial, Andrews contended that the jury had erred in convicting Betty Lou and urged them to resolve any remaining doubts by opting for a life sentence instead of the death penalty. The Constitution mandated that the counsel explore potentially mitigating factors only when a reasonably competent attorney would have deemed it necessary to do so. Andrews had a personal relationship with Betty Lou and had previously represented her in various legal matters throughout their association and during the representation concerning the capital murder charge. Betty Lou never indicated to Andrews that she had experienced abuse from her former husbands or partners. Neither Betty Lou nor any of her family members provided Andrews with any information that would suggest a history of physical abuse. So that allegation of her being physically abused by all of her husbands was bullshit. Yeah, it was bullshit, y'all. In fact, Beats actually expressed to Andrews that Jimmy John, I keep saying Jimmy John, y'all forgive me, Jimmy Don, was the best thing that had ever happened to her and that she had felt deep affection for him. So, if he was the best thing that had ever happened to you, why the fuck you're accusing him of domestic violence? Why the hell did you kill him, right? No, baby. I mean, something's up, right? So, in a summary, Beats actually corroborated that sentiment during her testimony at trial. She said that Jimmy Don was the best thing that had happened to her in trial, y'all. And she had a great love for him. So in summary, Andrew's choice not to investigate or present evidence regarding Betty Lou's mental, physical, or emotional history was not more unreasonable than similar decisions made by the counsel in Strickland. Moreover, Andrew's omission of evidence concerning Betty Lou's mental, physical, and emotional state did not result in prejudice. A jury that had already concluded that Betty Lou intentionally murdered her husband to gain financial gain would likely not have been swayed by mitigating evidence suggesting that she was unable to control her actions. Yeah, Betty Lou knew what the fuck she was doing. Lie to someone else, but I can see straight through it. Betty Lou has failed to demonstrate a reasonable probability that had her mitigating evidence been introduced, she would have avoided a death sentence. So she contended that the prosecution neglected to inform Andrews about agreements made with two of her children who testified against her during the trial. Her son, Robert Branson, acknowledged that he actually did help assist his mother in disposing of Jimmy Don's body, but he was not the murderer. While her daughter, Shirley Stegner, confessed to being involved in the murder of Mr. Baker, her fourth husband. So she confessed to being involved, but not the one who killed him. The sole evidence Betty Lou provided to support her claims of leniency promises in the absence of charges against those two children of hers didn't come until several years later. After they reviewed substantial testimony on that matter, the district court determined that there was no such promises that had been made with her children, and a conclusion that it was not clearly erroneous. Nonetheless, during the capital murder trial, Andrews sought to undermine the credibility of those witnesses, her children, by questioning them about any deals or arrangements with the prosecution. Although Andrews later admitted he did not believe any leniency agreements were in place, he still suggested the possibility of such agreements in his closing arguments. Consequently, Betty Lou was able to leverage the credibility challenge despite the lack of evidence for any leniency promises. So, y'all, in conclusion, Andrews did not experience a genuine conflict of interest by remaining as Betty Lou's advocate and neglecting to withdraw or provide testimony, nor did his actions negatively impact the quality of his performance in the courtroom. Regarding Betty Lou's claim of ineffective counsel, Andrews' performance during the trial was not lacking, nor did he harm Betty Lou by not introducing mitigating evidence related to battered woman syndrome. That's a false claim. There's no proof to prove it. Find them proof, Betty Lou. Find them proof. Furthermore, Betty Lou failed to demonstrate that the prosecution made undisclosed promises of leniency concerning her children. Consequently, the district court's judgment granting the writ of habeas corpus was reversed. So, Patrick E. Higginbotham, circuit judge, said the following: I concur with the decision to affirm Betty Lou's conviction and sentence, as well as the conclusion that no actual conflict has been demonstrated. However, I do not concur with the alternative perspective presented in the opinion, which suggests that the conviction and sentence could be upheld under the adverse effect test established by Collier v. Sullivan, should it be determined applicable. Furthermore, I contend that in suitable circumstances, the adverse effects test ought to be limited to conflicts arising from the competing interests of multiple clients. The court has not provided a clear definition of adverse effect. In the absence of such clarity, recognizing that Collier did not necessitate a demonstration of prejudice, and the district judge formulated the following rule: an adverse effect of performance is shown when counsel, burdened by an actual conflict of interest, engages in actions that are inconsistent with the best interest of his client. This formulation encapsulates the somewhat ambiguous lesser standard. So the choice made by E. Ray Andrews, the trial attorney for Betty Lou, not to take the stand negatively impacted her defense. Andrews possessed crucial testimony that could have addressed the pivotal question of whether the murder of Jimmy Don Beats was committed for financial gain or self-defense, right? Because that domestic violence claim she's claiming, right? Anyways, in particular, Andrews had the ability to contest the prosecution's assertion that Betty Lou had killed her husband to obtain insurance and other benefits associated with his death. Should the jury have had reasonable doubts regarding that motive of financial gain in the killing, act would not qualify as a capital offense. So, Betty Lou was not required to demonstrate actual prejudice, indicating that the outcome of the trial might have been different. And to obtain relief, she needed to show that her representation was adversely affected. And in its alternative finding of no adverse effect, the majority effectively shifts the responsibility onto Betty Lou Beats. So, a similar conclusion can be reasonably drawn for determination of no actual conflict in case of non-multiple representation. And it was established during the trial that Robbie, the son of Betty Lou, had intentionally set the boat adrift to create delusion that Jimmy Don had fallen overboard, while Betty Lou spread the heart pills all over. And the planter was also referred to as a wishing well, right? Because that's where Jimmy Don was buried, in the wishing well. Betty Lou primarily argued during the trial that her son, Robbie Branson, was the one who actually killed Jimmy Don following a dispute. During the federal habeas hearing, Andrews indicated that his defense strategy was, first of all, to demonstrate Betty Lou's innocence, and he further testified that his primary defense was to establish that Betty Lou was not guilty. How? Because she wasn't contacted until 2 years later, right? It remained uncertain that Betty Lou was actually entitled to an evidentiary hearing if her case were to arise in the present day, it is evident more questionable that she would actually qualify for such a hearing under the cause and prejudice standard. So in today, how everything took place in the case, Betty Lou would actually be entitled to that evidentiary hearing. She will qualify for that hearing solely if she could demonstrate a valid reason for her inability to establish the facts during the state court proceedings, along with actual prejudice stemming from that inability. Furthermore, her lack of development of claims in state court would be justified, and a hearing would be required only if she could prove that not conducting a federal evidentiary hearing would lead to a fundamental miscarriage of justice, right? So if a lawyer, after accepting employment in anticipated or ongoing litigation, becomes aware or is evident that he or she or a member of his firm should serve as a witness for that client, they are actually required to withdraw from the trial proceedings. And his firm also, right? Betty Lou provided that testimony personally during the trial, and the nature of the document, which Roberts believed originated from a credit union in Dallas, remains uncertain regarding in connection to an actual policy. So basically, they said that there was a policy from a credit union, right? And it seemed that Roberts was unable to ascertain the precise details of that policy from the credit union. And he subsequently sent a letter to the credit union inquiring whether they had a policy resulting in Jimmy Down, right? The state argued that Roberts' testimony makes Andrew's potential testimony merely redundant. So the state maintained that when an attorney's testimony is not critical to the case or merely duplicates other evidence in the case, they are not ethically obligated to withdraw from representation. So that was the case. So he didn't have to withdraw. So in consideration of Justin Marshall's separation opinion in Collier, the judge contended that the defendant was required to demonstrate the existence of actual conflict without any additional requirements, and he concluded that conflict of interest was not in place. So, let's get to execution day. Betty Lou Beats was put to death by lethal injection at 6:18 p.m. Central Standard Time on February 24th, 2000. And this was within the Huntsville unit. So she did not ask for a last meal, nor did she provide a final statement. Betty Lou was the second woman to be executed in the state of Texas following the reinstatement of the death penalty. At the time of her execution, she was 62 years old and was the mother of 5 children, grandmother to 9, and a great-grandmother to 6. In accordance with the common practice for executed individuals, Beats was cremated after her death, and her ashes were dispersed over her mother's grave, which I bet her mother was rolling in her grave. Y'all ever heard that saying? Rolling in the grave? I know her mom was rolling in the grave. And that basically that saying is like, her mom wouldn't be able to handle that her daughter created these heinous crimes. And she would just be going crazy like, I raised you better than that. What the hell's wrong with you? Right? But her mom was like psychotic too. Like had mental problems. So, I don't know. So, a condemned prisoner's final meal is a traditional practice that occurs prior to execution. But she didn't want that. And in numerous countries, the inmate is actually permitted to choose their last meal within certain reasonable limits, right? Despite the widespread belief that last meal requests, no matter how elaborate, must be honored, there are several limitations that actually regard what can be requested. Now, in the United States, most states provide the meal 1 or 2 days before the execution, offering actually referring it to as a special meal. Requests for alcohol and tobacco are typically, though not universally, denied. If a requested item is deemed unorthodox or unavailable, it is often substituted with a similar alternative. But some states impose strict regulations on those last meal requests. Occasionally, a prisoner may wish to share their last meal with another inmate, as was in the case with Francis Crowley and John Resco in 1932. Or they actually may request that the meal be shared among fellow inmates, as Raymond Fernandez did in 1951. So, February 24th, 2000, the U.S., Texas carries out the execution of Betty Lou Beats. Betty Lou Beats, age 62, was the 4th woman to be executed in the United States since the Supreme Court reinstated the death penalty in 1976. According to the CBS News outlet, correspondent Hattie Kaufman, the convicted murderer declined a final meal and did not offer a last-minute confession. There was no family members of Betty Lou that was present during her execution, and she asserted that she killed her fifth husband, Jimmy Don Beats, in self-defense due to his abusive behavior. However, prosecutors labeled her as the Black Widow, alleging that her motive was just to obtain life insurance benefits. Although she was charged in connection with the death of her fourth husband, she was never convicted. But she had previously shot and injured her second husband, you remember? Now, Jamie, the son of Jimmy Don Beats, was present at the execution. And it appeared that Betty Lou was not remorseful nor afraid, as she was secured to the gurney moments before her execution. And Jimmy Don Beats' son, Jamie, remarked that she displayed no expression on her face whatsoever. And he made the following statements. I concentrated on my father. I observed his face and recognized that he was smiling and that it was finally over. Now, Jamie expressed his belief that his father would have felt relief regarding the execution. He made another statement that, I believe my dad would want this to be concluded for both me and the family. He stated that he required closure. He needed to bring this to a conclusion to advocate for his father and to inform others about the kind of man he was. Now, Jamie stated that his father was a good person and he didn't harm anyone. Betty Lou Beats faced accusations regarding the murder of her fourth husband, Doyle Baker, although she was never found guilty. Rodney Baker, the son of Doyle, was present during Betty Lou's execution as well. And following the execution, he stated the following. I felt a lot of burden just lift off me. It's just like a lot of weight just lifted off me. Now, Beats marks the 120th individual to be executed in Texas since George W. Bush assumed the governmentship. In a statement released before the execution, President Bush stated the following. After careful review of the evidence in this case, I concur with the jury that Betty Lou Beats is guilty of this murder. And in an emotional appeal to save their mother's life, Beats' daughters actually tried presenting images of a wounded and injured mother to the state parole board earlier before her execution, asserting that she had endured severe abuse at the hands of all her husbands. Look, at a last ditch for plea, y'all, I understand. Like, that's your mother. But your mother did wrong, baby. Your mother did wrong. I understand you're trying to save her life. You're trying to plead with the courts. But, sweetheart, as a mother who was actually going through the same thing with her children and their father, let me explain something to you. I feel bad for my children. I don't feel bad for that man who created the crime. You understand what I'm saying? And in a statement, one of Betty Lou's daughters stated the following. I wish to God the jury had been informed of the truth regarding my mother. And that was by her daughter, Faith. Now, advocates against domestic violence and various human rights organizations urged Governor Bush to grant clemency to Betty Lou. And they were citing her alleged abuse by her father and all five of her husbands, as well as inadequate legal representation during her trial. Betty Lou, her husband, right, Beats, he was a father of 5, grandfather of 9, and a great-grandfather of 6. And, y'all, it's sad. Like, he couldn't see any of that, right? He couldn't see his grandchildren, his great-grands. And Betty Lou, she was actually the second woman executed in Texas, right? And that was since the United States, reinstated the death penalty in 1976. Now, Governor Bush consistently indicated that he would only contemplate clemency in instances of actual innocence or where the courts have not conducted a comprehensive review during appeals process. Despite having her death sentence overturned twice due to significant legal issues, Betty Lou Beats was facing imminent execution by lethal injection, and that occurred just 2 weeks before her 63rd birthday. So Betty Lou Beats, died. She died. She was executed lethal injection, 6:18 p.m., February 4th, year 2000. Now, she had suspected of 2, and she confessed to 0. She was only convicted to 1 victim. She was labeled the Black Widow, and she actually had 3 siblings, 1 older brother, 1 younger brother, and 1 younger sister. And she was the middle child, and she had problems in school. She was teased while she was in school. Apparently, Betty Lou Beats was actually really attractive, despite losing her hearing from the measles, and she actually had a speech defect. And she had a head injury, which most serial killers always have something crazy, right? Something happened. And she was raped by her father. I mean, that is husband. There was actually claims that she was actually raped by her husband, but there was obviously no proof of that. So her highest grade she completed in school was 7th grade. And there was no way to grade her IQ at this time because, I mean, this was before IQ tests and everything really came to play, right? She had a total of 6 children, married and divorced 5 times, and during the murder, she lived with her son, Robbie. Now, she didn't torture animals. Supposedly, she didn't set fires, but that trailer would say otherwise. And she didn't wet the bed or anything like that. She did abuse alcohol. She was a chronic alcohol drinker, and apparently she was diagnosed with battered woman syndrome and PTSD. So, yeah, she was convicted, and she shot them with the .38 Colt revolver, y'all. And she kept blaming her son and daughter for the murders. She wouldn't take responsibility. She would not. And she met most of her husbands in bars. So, this is Betty Lou Beats. Betty Lou Beats, y'all. And I'm going to post all this information. There's not too many pictures. But, yeah, you get to see who Betty Lou Beats was and how she aged over the years and, you know, how she was when she was arrested. She was a grandma, y'all. Grandma. Anyways, if you enjoyed our show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, iTunes. Yeah, leave us a review, y'all. Hello, help the show. But yeah, just follow and subscribe. Most of my listeners, y'all, are not subscribed. What are you doing? Subscribe to the channel, y'all. Do that. Remember our Patreon packages? We got the Kuyons, we got the Lanyapas, and we got the infamous Go-Getters. Thank y'all for being a patron, and be sure to come back next week. We're discussing the Noun Sisters. Until then, this is your host, Sarah Sidier, and I hope y'all have a great weekend. Bye!